The Able to Care podcast is sponsored by Able Training Support Limited, who build partnerships with organisations to develop confidence and competence in their team to promote positive outcomes for all. Find the link in the description. Hi, and welcome to Able to Care podcast. My name is Andy, and I am your host. And joining me is my co-host, Nadine Sutton.
Hello.
Hello. So, as far as this week's episode's concerned, or this episode's concerned, we're going to do it a little bit differently, aren't we? So, rather than kind of necessarily kind of focusing on one topic, we're going to look at a case situation that you came across and kind of just have a bit of a discussion around it from a behavioural point of view predominantly. So do you want to start off by kind of telling us a bit about it, and then we can kind of take it from there?
Yeah, so adult setting, adults with mental health and or learning disabilities. And I was talking to a caregiver about this one gent that they sort of had he wasn't challenging, the encounter was challenging. So lots of different factors had played into it. So he hadn't had the greatest night's sleep. The staff that was on the night shift, he didn't connect with very well. I think one of his cigarette times was cut short the night before. So all of these things for him were really important. So things like having a can of Coke, for example, or the certain medication or certain interactions with staff, mainly because of some of his conditions meant that those were the things that he fixated on. So he had Asperger's, schizophrenia, and also OCD as well. So there's a lot of different factors going on there. They had a very strict support plan in place because of these factors. So he wasn't a challenge. Just sometimes the situations presented as quite challenging. There was one particular morning though, so it was 2-1 at all times. 2 staff members were on. And he just sort of expressed to his staff members, I've had a rubbish night, I didn't like that staff member, I'm anxious. And he stated that he needed some medication, lorazepam in particular. And if anybody's ever had lorazepam, it's kind of calms you down a little bit. Anything with Pam on the end does that, doesn't it? So bit of Pam. But the staff had a strategy in place that before he was given PRN medication, obviously within care, you don't want to overuse the medication. They had a sort of like a checklist that they would have to work through. So it was a case of, okay, let's try this first before we do that. Let's try the more therapeutic interaction. It didn't work. He was already too far escalated by this point. He was really anxious, really upset. And I think he just wanted the medication. When he was explained to for boundaries, let's try X, Y, and Z, he just picked up chairs and just chucked them through the window. So obviously really, really dangerous situation for the staff members and for him. Now, that incident happened. There were lots of things that kind of went on after. The next day he was due to go to the cinema. Now, this is 24 hours later, completely new day. One of the staff members, those 2 staff members that was on with him during that incident, on with him the next day, it was in his activity plan to go to the cinema. And one of the staff members turned around and said, why should he get to go to the cinema when he did that yesterday? And it just made me think a little bit, the ways of sometimes thinking and how we think punishing him by not taking him to the cinema for something that he'd done the day before, how would that be beneficial for him? And needless to say, that created more behaviours that day, more unwanted and hazardous and harmful behaviours towards himself and towards the staff members. So
100%. I think there's a few kind of things that you mentioned in there that I think are quite nice to hear. One, the fact that you mentioned what we call setting events. So setting events are all the bits that obviously they'd made aware to you. He didn't sleep very well. There was some of the stuff he didn't like on and stuff. So it obviously had been a kind of a curiosity around his behaviour. So that's quite nice to hear. They're kind of going, oh, okay, this wasn't an isolated, he kicked off for no reason. It was a case of, okay, there's lots of factors, as you mentioned. It sounds like quite a complex case. And I think obviously we do an awful lot around teaching around behaviour management and those sorts of things. And more than likely, if we fine-tooth combed the incident, there's probably things that could have been done slightly differently, that could have helped more effectively. There may be, if we were to micromanage it, ways that the staff responded to certain triggers. That, hey, it could have de-escalated. There could have been things, but sometimes things go wrong.
Things happen, yeah.
Things happen, absolutely. I think what you mentioned there is that human beings, we do have, or we're not the only animal that does this, we have this innate sense of justice sometimes. Because this person's done this, there should be a punishment, a consequence. And I think we have to very much recognize there's lots of things that we innately feel and do that doesn't make it okay, and it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it the best way of doing it. So I think it's worth maybe touching on this episode a little bit about kind of old logic thinking when it comes to kind of care, and then why that may be detrimental. And you described already, didn't you, that it made the second day worse, it caused further distress. I think it is maybe worth acknowledging the carers' feelings. I can understand they're feeling angry, upset. They tried everything and they felt at the end of their tether. And
the staff member was hurt as well, was injured, and not to the point of like A&E injured, but like had a couple of cuts and stuff like that. So I could completely understand from a caregiver's point of view, it's not nice. But I did question the caregivers. And why was that the thought process that, well, he shouldn't get to go to the cinema? Yeah. What would they think that would achieve? And why, again, yeah.
So there's so much to kind of unpack when it comes to kind of behaviour management. I think one of the things that's maybe worth addressing on this one is this old logic, which is for years and years and years, we've based our behaviour management around the principles of behaviourism. And behaviourism, some people out there may be aware of the psychological theory. Most of you will have trained your dog using a similar kind of strategy. That basically the idea is that humans or animals move towards pleasure and away from pain. So do something good, you get something good. Do something bad, there's a consequence. And that's how then many people try and parent. It's how society works. Like you do something bad, you go to prison. I don't know what the you do something good is that we get within society, but that's kind of ingrained. Schools, you do something bad, you get expelled or detention. You do something good, you get told well done and praised. So this is kind of conditioned. And even employers. The problem is it's an overly simplistic way of understanding behavior, and not just humans. This is for animals as well. And there's all sorts of problems. So maybe we just touch on the initial one, which is cause and effect. So cause and effect, for me to be able to learn through behaviourist kind of, because you did that, you get this. I have to be able to connect the dots. So if I do something wrong on a Tuesday, as a result of that, something bad happens to me on a Saturday, I'll probably be able to connect the dots and go, well, I didn't like what happened on a Saturday. So if I change what I did on the Tuesday, maybe the outcomes would be different on the Saturday. And that's how I can then learn from behaviour. But that requires me to be able to expand my horizons to connect the dots to what happens now, how it impacts on the future, or things that have happened in the past, how they affect the present. Not everybody has that same ability to be able to do that. We don't all have that same cognitive skill or the same way of our brains kind of focusing on certain aspects.
Same level of understanding, isn't it? Yeah.
So if we use the example, for instance, let's say somebody with ADHD, for instance, where their brains are a little bit more, they're in the moment, that's the way their brains work. The myopic thinking, everything's in the here and now. So suddenly they do something wrong on a Tuesday and a punishment is initiated on the Saturday, but they don't really connect the dots. So they haven't learned anything. All we've done is reduce their quality of life on the Saturday. We've taken something nice away from them. That isn't going to change their behavior, isn't going to change their outcomes. In fact, all it does is just cause resentment or distress or distrust or the big one is
anger for a week.
Anger for a week, absolutely, absolutely. This is why when we're teaching around ADHD, it's that kind of immediacy needs to be there for either consequences or reinforcement as well. I think the other big problem, we've talked about it before, is that so it's what's called the punishment cycle. I think you describe it maybe in a slightly different way to me. But the punishment cycle is, if I do something wrong and you initiate some kind of punishment, okay? Now, when we're talking about punishment, that could be I initiate something, an unpleasurable stimulus to reduce the chance of that behavior occurring. So that could be like lines at school, or
I mean, in your day, it'd have been slipper, wouldn't it?
There was a head teacher that. What do you mean in my day? There was a head teacher though. No, but still, smacking was allowed at school when I was at school. Yeah, I remember the head teacher. I remember a couple of lads got the slipper.
Yeah,
because
bloody long time ago,
canes I think were banned when I was at school, but slippers were still. What was that?
You carry on under.
But yeah, slippers are still allowed. But yeah, it was a case of initiating punishment. So that's an unpleasant stimulus to reduce the chance of behaviour occurring. Or I take away something pleasurable to reduce the chance of behaviour occurring. And that's, again, within schools, that would be taking away break time. That would be
mobile phones nowadays.
Yeah, taking away your electrical privileges, or taking my attention away from you as well. So I initiate something unpleasant. Now, the effect of that is then, does that increase or reduce that person's quality of life, even if it's only temporary? And the answer is it usually reduces. So like not taking that guy out on his day out the following day hasn't improved the quality of life. It's taken something he looked forward to by the sounds of it, something part of his normal routine and predictability, and therefore taken away, reduced the quality of his life. Now, is that going to have the effect of building his self-esteem and trust and improving his mood? Or is it actually going to have the effect of deteriorating his mood, damaging trust, and especially damaging his self-esteem?
Yeah.
If it damages self-esteem, lowering somebody's self-esteem doesn't tend to lead to improve outcomes, improve their behavior. In fact, quite the opposite. So, and that's the punishment cycle that then you're going to get more negative behavior as a result of that.
Of course, yeah.
Sometimes, but this is the objections I get. Sometimes people go, yeah, but sometimes it works. You know, if I initiate this punishment or I initiate this consequence, sometimes it stops that behavior. I try and get over, but the cycle may still continue.
Can I ask a question there, though? So I know for some people it like they think it works and stuff, but would that only work if, let's say it's parent and child, for example, or caregiver and service user, and they've got a good close bond and things like that. So we're not punish them to get them to experience massive amounts of unpleasurable pain or whatever. Could it work if there was consistent boundary and they knew that they were still loved by the end of it?
Yeah, so that's one of the things that, because I come across a lot of parents going, well, I've raised my kids like that. And
yeah.
One of the things I try and get over with that damaging self-esteem is that this is where the learned helplessness comes into play.
Yeah.
If my self-esteem is really good, if let's say I had a caregiver who spent at least the first year of my life and probably longer giving me unconditional love, that I'm, valued and accepted just for who I am and that I really matter within this world. I also am developing mastery, where it's a case of I learn how to communicate. I learn how to grab that rattle. I learn how to, whatever it is, I'm through achievement, I'm building my self-esteem through successes, essentially. Yeah. And then I've got this kind of this resilience, this, hey, I'm good, I'm worthwhile. If there is then, a punishment, a knock-on, a negative, a consequence, I may experience that reduced quality of life, but I can probably bounce back from it. I probably go, well, that hurt a little bit. That didn't feel nice, but I'm good. I made a mistake. And then I can kind of bounce back from that. If there's been a consistent, you always mess up, you always get it wrong, you always do bad, or I believe that about myself, well, suddenly then I can't bounce back. It's a case of, see, I messed up again.
Yeah.
The learned helplessness is a counter to the whole behavioristic kind of principle, really. My favorite example of this was actually way before I started kind of studying this area. There's a guy called Jeff Thompson, an author, wrote a book called The Elephant and the Twig. And The Elephant and the Twig, he uses it as a kind of a self-motivation thing. It's more of a personal development side of things for adults, that we all get caught in this learned helplessness. You can't because. And so he's used the example that in certain areas of the world, the way they train elephants is when they're very young, they tether these young elephants to a tree that's solid. They can't pull away, they can't do anything. So no matter how much a young elephant pulls, it can't escape. Over a period of time, it then stops bothering to try and pull. It doesn't bother anymore. So then they lower the tree down to a sapling, down to nothing but a twig. Then as the young elephant develops, grows older, you've now got a 7-ton adult elephant that could be tethered with nothing but a twig, because it's so conditioned to go, I can't escape. It doesn't even try anymore. And I think when you are I think this is especially when working with individuals who've either experienced trauma and abuse, who've got learning disabilities, neurodiversity, numerous factors can affect this, that if a lot of their early experiences of life is getting it wrong, and not necessarily because they did anything wrong, but because it was either perceived wrong through caregivers who didn't understand their needs, or caregivers who had expectations or emotional difficulties themselves, so it was always they're in the wrong. Over that period of time, they're just going to go, I always mess up, I always get punished. So what's the point in trying to be good if I always get it wrong?
Yeah.
And that self-esteem is so damaged that it just deepens the spiral into negativity, and that leads to all sorts of other problems, I think.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't think these caregivers were bad people.
No.
And I don't think, obviously, that when the comment was made, I think it was made out of fear. So what if this happens in public? I think it wasn't that she wanted to take away his activity or wanted him to, be really remorseful or shamed in or anything. It's more, I think it was more the case of, if this happens and it's out of my control again, what if I get injured? So it could, and I think a lot of caregivers definitely feel like that. It's really hard as a caregiver, like speaking from experience, to come out of that. But we know now through training, through obviously people doing CPD, listening to good podcasts as well, all that sort of thing, that there is different ways, and the way that we've been doing it is not really that effective, is it?
No. There's some amazing work that I'm reading at the moment, really kind of shifting our thinking away from the kind of the behaviorist thinking. There's quite a few models that I've kind of already kind of then explored and kind of initiated that are very different from the kind of the punishment reward principles. But I think it is hard to overcome. It is so conditioned in society.
Of course, yeah.
As far as, ranging from the super nanny, for children.
Yeah.
And there is an element but this is the thing. So I use an example. I had a group that was similar, and they said that this guy who usually got this certain activity or certain thing every week, they didn't feel it right. He'd assaulted a member of staff in the morning, and they felt he shouldn't have been allowed this thing in the afternoon. Okay.
Yeah.
But there was no connection between the thing in the afternoon and what he did in the morning. There was no connection between it. It just happened to occur on the same day. The way I tried to put it over to them, because this guy had, intellectual disabilities and stuff like that as well, as well as emotional behavioural problems and mental health issues. So the way I put it across is, right, let's say I had a dog, and in the morning I left that dog at home, and unfortunately the dog had a bit of a funny tummy and ended up making a mess on my carpet. I then go home in the evening and find this mess on my carpet, and I get angry and shout at the dog. Okay, now does that dog understand why I'm angry at it? Okay. And the obvious answer is, well, no, it's not going to make the connection from what I did earlier to what happened now. So have we then changed that dog's behavior or taught the dog anything? No, all we've done is asserted our dominance over a weaker animal. We may have made ourselves feel better, but there's no positive outcomes from that whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm sure if the dog, and this is the way I put it, I'm sure if the dog had other ways, like had known what to do instead, I'm sure if the dog had known, how to open the door, for instance, to go outside, it would have taken that option. I'm sure if you'd ever trained the dog to use a mobile phone to go, can you come home, please? I'm a bit desperate. It would have done that. It did the only thing it could in that moment. So why would we punish it for that?
Yeah.
But then there's no connection between later on taking that thing away or shouting or whatever. And that's why I tried to get over that, taking this particular thing away from this guy. I'm sure if he'd coped with his emotions, had other ways of communicating, he probably wouldn't assaulted that member of staff. He obviously wasn't okay, because happy people don't hit people. So something must have been wrong.
No.
But by taking that away in the afternoon, how was that relevant? How did it connect? What did he learn? It was just you asserting dominance over a vulnerable adult. So
I do think there is a forgetfulness in care that the people that we are looking after are, they're adults at risk or children at risk, and they do have neurological conditions that change the way that their brains work. They don't operate in the same way as us. And I think sometimes it's good for caregivers to remind themselves, like, well, that's wrong and it's unacceptable in your world.
Well, it is wrong and unacceptable. In fact,
some behaviours can
carers shouldn't be hit. Do you know what I mean?
No, I understand that. Just from a carer's point of view, like I don't think any carer should. We don't get paid. Well, they don't get paid enough. Definitely, nobody does. But I think there should also be that that cognitive thinking there themselves, like, do you know what, this person is struggling right now. It looks at, again, I know we spoke about it earlier, but it's a challenging behaviour and they're doing something bad and wrong rather than they're struggling and they're finding something really difficult.
That's why I may have talked about this on other episodes and stuff, but that's why I found the epilepsy analogy so powerful. That if, let's say, somebody had an epileptic seizure and maybe I went over to try and support them, help them, protect their head, but in the process of having that seizure, they ended up smacking me in the face, right? That's still not okay. It's not okay that I got hurt. It doesn't make it right or good, but it also doesn't make it their fault.
No.
It doesn't mean they had any other control over it or they could have done anything different in that moment. And I think that's people really struggle with that related to cognitive processes and mental health and behavior.
Yeah.
Epilepsy is now accepted, the fact that, well, they don't have any control over that. They can't choose what they're doing or anything. I think, and I find it an amazingly fascinating kind of area of exploration regarding the kind of the control we have over behavior.
Yeah. So all I was going to say there as well, obviously we spoke about the people that we support with those cognitive impairments or differences or whatever. But I feel like it's the same with smaller children. There's a massive expectation on very, very small children to know the difference between right and wrong.
Yeah.
And I've been reading a lot in news that gentle parenting don't work and this, that. And it really baffles my brain because, again, that's our generation carrying through that old style, old punishment.
Yeah.
Like, well, they're going to learn by doing this, when actually they could be causing like a bit more damage.
I think the gentle parenting is an interesting one. And obviously I'm a big advocate of the therapeutic parenting model and stuff like that, which is much more, its thing is, I think there's a perception it's kind of letting the kids do whatever they want to do. It's just not. It's very boundaried. It's the same as any therapeutic relationship, has to be very, very boundaried, the same as any relationship should be boundaried of what is and what isn't acceptable, and no matter what the relationship is, physical violence towards me is not okay.
No.
But being empathic and kind of understanding about, but why did you feel that was the only thing you could do in that moment? Or why wasn't there opportunity to make other choices before you got to that point?
Yeah.
It's still that, the kind of whole, the understanding, empathizing side of things is so important to kind of get ingrained. It doesn't excuse the behavior. And I think that's why people sometimes think it does.
Yeah, that's it. We're not excusing behavior.
Yeah.
Like but I definitely think it's worth people that are giving care, whether it's child, adult or elderly person, worth exploring a little bit. So why do I feel like they need consequences for this, or why do I feel like they need punishment for this, when in hindsight this person was just trying to communicate like rubbish, or I've not had, I was going to say shit, sorry.
You can. We swear on this.
Feel like shit. But yeah, I think it's just worth like trying to challenge you as a caregiver, your own thoughts a little bit. I think. And I think we do that on training, don't we? Quite a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those things you can see sometimes people making sense of, that was an emotional reaction from me in that moment.
We get some like, I get a lot of those kinds of, and I'm like, look, you're not a bad human. It's not best practice, and it's not the greatest way to go around these things. Let's try and explore it a little bit.
I think one thing that's worth getting people to look into, is the concept of social learning rather than necessarily behaviourist learning.
Yeah.
So the social learning is kind of, we tend to copy those around us. So if I've got caregivers who are then, asserting their dominance over me or shouting at me, taking things away from me or whatever it is, what am I learning? So I'm learning those strategies. If somebody doesn't do something that you don't agree with, then you can shout, you can scream, you take something off them, you can whatever. Now, I may not be able to do that to the caregivers because they've got more power and authority, but I can do it to that person. I can do it to that person. And are we just trying to condition people to do what we want them to do? Or are we wanting to teach them how to cope better with their emotions, to communicate in the best way for them to be able to meet their needs or to express themselves and express their emotions? And I think that's where, what's your aim? Is your aim to punish or is your aim to teach?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we want to get it to the point before crime and stuff like that, obviously, because then it goes out of everybody else's hands, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, and but that's still where a societal change, I think, needs to happen. That it's still that's where it disappears, isn't it? And again, I'm not saying that somebody steals, somebody kills somebody else. It's not condoning the behaviour, but there's potentially things that could have been done before we got to that point. And one of the things is, improved understanding, improved kind of recognition of, well, why does this person feel that's appropriate? Why haven't they chosen any other action or behavior to meet their particular need or cope with their stress or whatever it is? That they're using this, what society views as maladaptive, or it is hazardous or something like that. I think that's, I'll give you another example, actually. This was a different scenario that was within a children's home. And this particular member of staff, he ended up leaving because he disagreed with the management's behaviour on this. It's slightly different from the ones that we've kind of mentioned so far. This girl had been working really hard towards a kind of reward that she was looking forward to, and it was to go and see one of her favourite bands live. And she'd a number of months been planning this. It'd been in place, she'd been doing stuff to kind of earn the money for the tickets and stuff like that. She'd earned it, right? In the week leading up to this concert, she ended up then having a meltdown and assaulting a member of staff. And this particular new member of staff, who I believe might have been the one who'd been assaulted, so again, I can understand the anger and stuff like that, but he left because they refused to take that concert offer as a consequence.
Yeah. I think I've heard this.
Yeah. It was one of the customers I've worked with a long time. And I completely agree with the management of, yes, she should have still been allowed to go. Why would you take away months and months and months of hard work and stuff like that from an incident? Yes, it's a bad incident, but all that's going to do is, why should I ever bother trying when I can just make one mistake and lose everything?
Yeah.
Now, maybe we know in the real world, well, that is the case, that is life, but I think that didn't need to be.
But also, is it life? Is that what happens in the real world? Like, imagine you're in a relationship, you have an argument with your partner before you go and watch a band.
Yeah.
You're going to still go watch the band. You just, it's just.
But I would put it on the on this. Yes, it does. I wonder which way you're going to go with the relationship on this. I think if I was in a relationship and go, well, you're not going to be allowed to go and watch a band now because we had an argument, I'd be a little bit like, that's not right.
No, you know what I'm saying though. Like go for it.
Just for a second, if I built years and years of trust and stuff like that, but then I cheat on you, that one bad thing can permanently damage. And so there is an element of that is
I'd
real
sell
life
the band
sometimes.
Tickets.
Yeah, that's it. You're not going to let me go to the concert then, are you? Well, I ain't going with you. You'd be tearing them up and throwing them away.
Yeah.
And so sometimes there is circumstances where one bad thing can permanently damage all the good you've ever done. You know, people who have philanthropists or stuff like that have then committed one crime and that's it. It's undone all the good they've ever done. So I do get there is certain circumstances where that happens. We as human beings tend to focus on the negative more than anything else. But I think when we're going through the teaching stages of life, particularly for children, or if we're working with people whose level of understanding is not the same, I don't think that's then appropriate for that.
No, I agree.
It's the same as like, children who've committed crimes, then having 40 years in prison. It's like, do you not think their brains, their whole person, their whole who they are changes in that time period?
Yeah.
I don't think it means that what they did was forgivable, but I think there's no chance for recourse of there's things that I know that I did in childhood.
We don't need to know, do we, Amanda?
Don't need to know.
You went nicking down Superdrug, didn't you?
Right, to be fair, the only thing I ever remember stealing was a walnut from my own dad's shop. And I got in, so I think there's 2 walnuts actually. Yeah, I nicked 2 walnuts from my dad used to run a shop. I nicked 2 walnuts and I got in so much trouble.
Yeah.
2 walnuts. I think it's Max or anything like that. I know it wasn't even a good thing to steal, was it? No. But so that's say again? So next time, that's what I thought. If I'm going to get in trouble anyway, I might as well nick a TV.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, that is a way that sometimes people's mentality Thanks. As far as like, if I'm going to get punished for that, well, I might as well earn it next time.
Yeah.
Might as well really get punished.
Push
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Again, I think for most of the people that we support in the health and social care sector, I don't know if that's the style of thinking. It could be very much, but sometimes I think it is more cognitive. It's more reactive to their
it's a cultural thing as well, isn't it? It depends on the culture of the
definitely.
setting and stuff like that.
But the way we manage the situation, and again, punishment, I just personally think there's consequences, of course, natural consequences, which we can do on another podcast.
Consequences. There's more cues in there than it should have been.
Yeah, there's natural consequences.
Yeah.
I can't say it. Yeah, it's that punishment I don't even like the word punishment.
Yeah, I think it's definitely worth, one time we'll have to do a bit of a chat about what consequences are and aren't appropriate and things like that. But yeah, I think it's definitely worthwhile kind of investigating further, because I think it's easy to sometimes go, well, you shouldn't do this. But I think sometimes one of the reasons we do use those is because we don't always know, well, what should I do instead?
That's it. Tell them what you want rather than what you don't want.
Well, that's it. That's the starting point as far as, behavioural management is concerned. So we'll touch on another time.
Okay.
Otherwise, thank you very much.
Bye, Enda.
Bye.